Okay, welcome everybody. This is the 175th McMaster MCM Capstone. Pleased to welcome Greg Iarusso, whose presentation is blockchain technology for public relations outcomes. His supervisor is Professor Josie Cassano-Rizzotti, and his second reader is Dr. Alex Sevnier. I am the chair, and I get the cop and time. Greg, he's got 25 minutes to present. And so his presentation will be straightforward. Then once he's done his presentation, we will then open the floor to questions. First off from his supervisor, Josie, and then his second reader, Alex, and then the chair reserves the right to ask questions as well. And if we have time in that 25-minute question and answer period, then we might have a question, another round, or open the floor to anybody in the gallery. So without further ado, it is now 11:04, 25 minutes. Greg, you are on the clock.
Awesome. Thank you, Terry. And thank you everyone for joining today. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to sharing with you my MCM Capstone presentation. So to begin the conversation today, I want to start by talking a little bit about trust. Today, it can feel like trust is fractured. Society's trust in government, media, and businesses is constantly being challenged. Faced with a pandemic, socioeconomic issues, we've witnessed the impact of what feels like increasing polarization within society around the globe. In addition to that, we have new AI technologies that can make fake videos appear totally realistic. And we have humanoid robots performing impressive and at times slightly terrifying feats. So if you feel like you don't know what to trust these days, it turns out you aren't alone. The Edelman Group is an internationally renowned public relations firm. They conduct an annual survey of people around the globe to measure levels of trust in societal institutions. And recently, they've discovered some slightly troubling trends. So for instance, the number of people who think that they and their families would be better off in 5 years is at an all-time low, 40%. 6 in 10 people say their default is to distrust something as a default. And only 30% of people say they would help someone else in need if that person disagrees with their point of view. In addition to that, trust in information sources is at record lows. We are faced with this growing crisis of misinformation through online media. So where does this leave us? Well, Edelman says that business is now the only trusted institution. Business is seen as both ethical and competent. So people are looking at business to act. People are expecting business to step up and fill the void of trust that's left by government and media and other institutions in society. So this begs the question, how? How can businesses rise to this challenge? Well, it just so happens that technological innovation that I mentioned earlier could be one way for businesses to fill this trust gap. And in my study, I looked at one technology in particular, blockchain. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking when you see this word. You might be thinking Bitcoin or some of the other cryptocurrencies that exist out there. But I want to make one thing very clear at the outset of the presentation, which is blockchain is not Bitcoin. Blockchain is not cryptocurrency. Instead, blockchain is the technology that underpins Bitcoin, but has many other use cases. It can be used in healthcare, in digital identity, government, and supply chain. Okay, so what is blockchain? To understand blockchain, first think about an accounting ledger, basically something that tracks a history of transactions between people or entities. Blockchain is that, but digital and decentralized. In other words, it's a ledger that records and verifies transactions across a network of multiple computers. Blockchain works by creating blocks of data, which can be pretty much anything. And then each new block of data is connected to the previous block and all the blocks before it, creating a chain of blocks. Now, the important part is that each computer on the blockchain network needs to approve every new block before it's added to the chain. Therefore, the information stored in the blockchain is immutable. It can't be altered without a consensus from all of the computers on the network. This eliminates the need for intermediaries, such as banks. It allows for direct peer-to-peer transactions in a trusted and decentralized way. So because of this, blockchain has created a name for itself as something like a trust machine. The Economist famously called it that in 2015. Since then, many other authors have looked at this and explored it. For instance, Kevin Werbach, an American author and academic, talks about how blockchain is ushering in a new architecture of trust, or this idea of trustless trust. Similarly, Michael J. Casey talks about the blockchain as a truth machine. And finally, Don and Alex Tapscott, a relatively famous father-son duo in the blockchain literature, talk about how companies that conduct some or all of their transactions on the blockchain will enjoy a trust bump in their share price. So despite some of these works, most of the academic literature on blockchain focuses on how the technology works from a technical perspective, and to a lesser extent on the what. In other words, why should an organization adopt blockchain? And this is where I think public relations can come in. So quick, a definition of public relations from the literature here. Public relations is the strategic management of relationships between an organization and its diverse publics through the use of communication to achieve mutual understanding, realize organizational goals, and serve the public interest. In short, public relations helps an organization build and maintain relationships with its stakeholders and enhance reputation. And just a quick note, relationships is where trust fits in, but we'll come back to that a bit later. So we have these two bodies of literature, public relations and blockchain. At the outset of my study, I conducted a review of these bodies of literature. And in public relations, there are some studies that talk about public relations outcomes of technology adoption, a lot of focus on social media. So how can social media be used to enhance public relations? But little to no mention of blockchain technology. On the other hand, as I mentioned in the blockchain literature, there's a lot about how the technology works from a technical perspective. There are some studies looking at how blockchain can be used for marketing, but no studies have looked at blockchain from a public relations perspective. And yet when you read both of these bodies of literature, there are these common themes that underlie both of the bodies of literature. And it's the things that I've been talking about, like trust, reputation, and relationships. So it's at this intersection between these two bodies of literature that my study focuses on. So my research question was, how and to what extent will blockchain technology adoption impact public relations outcomes, and in particular, relationships and reputation? So if blockchain is a trust machine, can it help companies fill that void of trust that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation? So to answer this question, I looked at a single embedded case study of Walmart. Why Walmart? In 2018, Walmart was faced with a string of bad E. coli outbreaks in their lettuce. Now, of course, this would have an impact on customers' trust in the company. And so in response, Walmart adopted a blockchain solution. It was called the Walmart Food Traceability Initiative. Basically, what they did is they issued an open letter to all of their leafy green suppliers and mandated that they would log all of their transactions on a blockchain. And what that allowed Walmart to do was, in the case of an outbreak, they could trace back a food product from their shelf to its origin in a matter of seconds. And this is something that usually would take days or weeks. This is a way for Walmart to try to enhance its trust that customers had in the products that it was providing to them. So the research question then becomes, how and to what extent did Walmart's food traceability initiative, anchored on blockchain technology, impact its relationships with its stakeholders and its reputation? So I looked at each of these questions separately, reputation and relationships, and I adopted different methodologies to answer those questions. So let's focus on reputation first. For reputation, I conducted a content analysis of nearly 60,000 tweets. I used a Python-based web scraping tool that basically allowed me to download every single tweet that mentioned the word Walmart over the course of a 7-day period. That 7-day period was anchored on the day that Walmart announced its Walmart Food Traceability Initiative, which was on September 24th, 2018. So I took the 3 days before that day, the 3 days after that day, scraped all the tweets that mentioned Walmart, And that would allow me to compare some of the tweets and discussion that was going on before the announcement and compare that to the tweets and discussion that was happening about Walmart after the announcement. So I took those tweets and I had to do a bit of data cleaning first because there was a lot there and I wanted to be able to make sense of them. So the first step was to classify each tweet as either blockchain related or not blockchain related. So essentially I wanted to know if the tweet was talking about Walmart's use of blockchain. Then I used a tool called Vader, which is a Python-based tool that allows me to classify each tweet with a sentiment score as either positive, neutral, or negative. Then I was able to analyze my tweets, but I wanted to ground this in theory. So I found a previous study from researchers Cavaggioli et al. In 2020, who did a study in Italy of 5 American companies that adopted Bitcoin as a method of payment and the impact of that on its reputation. So in that study, they adopted a framework of reputation that talked about 4 different elements of reputation for a corporation that were driven by different types of tweets. So I adopted this for my study, and I'll just quickly go over the framework here. The first element of reputation is being known. This is the volume of non-blockchain related tweets. So the number of tweets that just mention Walmart in general, not specific to blockchain. The second element is being known for something in particular. So this is the number of tweets that are talking about Walmart's use of blockchain. The third element starts to introduce the sentiment. So the third element is generalized favorability. This is the sentiment of non-blockchain related tweets, just the general tweets about Walmart. And the fourth, and what I would say the most interesting element, is being judged for something in particular, which is the sentiment of blockchain related tweets. Okay, so using this as a lens, let's look through the tweets that I pulled. So this visualization shows the number of tweets on the y-axis and the dates in the data frame that I pulled, those 7 days. The bottom line here is the number of blockchain related tweets. So you can see on the day of the announcement, there was a big influx in how many tweets were mentioning Walmart and blockchain, and that carried through for the following days after the announcement. So here's that element of being known for something. In other words, Walmart announced that they were using blockchain and people started to talk about it on Twitter. The blue line at the top here is the number of non-blockchain related tweets. So we don't see a spike or a trend around that day of the announcement. But if you look at the total number of tweets mentioning Walmart over the course of the 7 days, you do see this spike here on that day of the announcement. We can attribute this to Walmart's announcement of blockchain. And so here's that element of being known in general. In other words, Walmart's adoption of blockchain created more hype and chatter about the company on Twitter. So this only really tells half the story though, right? Because, okay, so Walmart adopts blockchain, people are talking about it on Twitter, but then the question is, well, what are they saying? Did they like the Walmart adopting blockchain? And so for that, we need to introduce the element of sentiment. But as I mentioned, Vader allows me to give each tweet a sentiment score. And Vader assigns a score to a tweet based on a scale of -1 to 1, with 1 being positive, -1 being negative. Through a series of tests, I adopted thresholds that would allow me to classify a tweet as either negative, neutral, or positive, and those are here. So anything that received a score of less than -0.5 was considered a negative tweet. Anything that scored over 0.5 was considered positive. Anything in between was neutral. Here's a quick breakdown of all the tweets in the data set. You can see most of them were neutral, some were positive, around 22%, and then a bit fewer than that were negative. But it gets really interesting when you look at the split between the tweets that were related to blockchain and those that were just general tweets about Walmart. So that's what we'll look at next. So here are the non-blockchain related tweets. You can see the split is very similar to the overall data set. So most tweets were neutral, some positive, some negative. The blockchain related tweets, showed a bit of a different story. Still most of them neutral, but the same amount positive, slightly more, but very few, almost none of the tweets about Walmart's use of blockchain were negative. So I conducted a chi-square test of these results to measure if this was statistically significant, and it turned out that they indeed were. So there was a difference here. It's also interesting to look at this tracked over the 7-day time period. So here, this next visualization, here's the y-axis of the sentiment score of tweets. Then on the x-axis, we have the dates. And then here's the breakdown of the tweets based on the tweet type. So the blue line is blockchain related tweets. You can see that the sentiment score of blockchain related tweets is double that of non-blockchain related tweets, the green line there at the bottom. So there's that element of being judged for something. The tweets about Walmart's use of blockchain were more positive than just general tweets of Walmart. You might be looking at this weird peak over here before the 24th. So these are tweets about Walmart's use of blockchain before they announced it on the 24th. My theory is that this was a couple of very keen journalists or industry experts who caught wind of the news before Walmart announced it, and they were feeling particularly positive about it. So the green line I mentioned at the bottom here, the non-blockchain related tweets, this is that element of generalized favorability. You see there's not really a trend around that period of the announcement. So we can't really say that Walmart's use or adoption of blockchain drove more positive sentiment in other tweets that were just talking about Walmart in general. And this is consistent with findings of that other research that I mentioned from Cavagioli et al. Okay, so back to the research question. There is this evidence to show that Walmart's use of blockchain did enhance its reputation. So let's look at relationships now. So for relationships, I also wanted to ground my analysis in theory. And so I adopted a tool from this quite popular research paper called Guidelines for Measuring Relationships in Public Relations by Grunig and Hahn. So what they did in this research paper is they found a way to develop a tool that could quantifiably measure an organization's relationship with its stakeholders. The way they do that is by looking at 6 different indicators of an organizational public relationship. Those 6 indicators are here. Basically, what this tool allows you to do is score each of these relationship indicators on a scale of 1 to 9. And the way you do that is that you ask people a series of questions, of Likert scale questions, such as, this organization keeps its promises, or I'm happy with this organization, and asking respondents to rate their level of agreement or disagreement with that statement on a scale of 1 to 9. If you ask them a series of questions, you can average those out and then get a score for each of these indicators to show their level of relationships with that organization. So I took this tool, I shortened it a little bit, and then I administered that to survey respondents, and I got a baseline relationship score for each of these indicators of their feelings towards Walmart. Then I asked them to watch a 1-minute video of a Walmart executive talking about Walmart's adoption of blockchain. And then I administered the same survey after they watched the video to get what I called a post-test relationship score. Then the idea was compare the post-test relationship score to the baseline relationship score and see if there was a change. So did the independent variable, Walmart's use of blockchain, impact the dependent variable, the stakeholders' relationship with Walmart? Quick note about the survey and sampling. So this was an online survey. It was open for about 4 or 5 months. My main sampling method was snowball sampling. So I bugged my family, my friends, and my colleagues to take the survey and recruit others to take it as well. I also spent $50 and promoted it on Twitter. And that yielded me over 1,200 responses. However, a vast majority of these were completely blank. And those were the ones that came from Twitter, which I think tells a little story about potential bots on Twitter, which is maybe a topic for another research study. So anyways, by the time I removed all the blank survey responses, I was left with 68 that I could actually use in the analysis. So I want my money back from Twitter. Okay, so into the results. So this visualization is showing those 6 relationship indicators along the x-axis. On the y-axis, we have the score of relationships on that scale of 1 to 9. And then the blue bars here are the baseline scores. So these were the scores before the respondent knew about Walmart's use of blockchain, hovering around that 4 or 5 mark, so kind of neutral. Then after they'd watched the video, gotten the post-test scores, here are the results in orange. So you can see right away that there was an increase in all of the relationship indicators after respondents learned about Walmart's use of blockchain, except for that very last one on the end, exchange, it went down. But the thing about this is that exchange relationship indicator is negatively keyed. In other words, a decrease in that can be interpreted as a positive outcome for Walmart. I conducted one-tailed paired t-tests of these results and found that the results were all statistically significant, aside from that last exchange relationship indicator that I just mentioned. Okay, so these green arrows here that show the difference between baseline and post-test is I considered the delta, the change. This table then shows the mean, median, maximum, and minimum deltas for each of those 6 relationship outcomes. And just a few to point out some of the larger changes: trust, commitment, and communal relationships. Nearly a 1-point score change on a 9-point scale. And some of these went up at maximum of 4 points. So in other words, a survey respondent increased their level of trust in Walmart 4 points on a 9-point scale after learning about Walmart's use of blockchain. Interestingly, there were some differences in results here based on demographic characteristics of respondents. For instance, female respondents had higher deltas than male respondents, sorry. There were also some differences based on the age of the respondent. However, none of these results were statistically significant. Yet, there was that evidence to show that Walmart's use of blockchain enhanced its relationships with stakeholders. Okay, so what? So what is that blockchain was a strategic asset for Walmart. In a world where trust is in crisis, Walmart was able to use blockchain technology in a way that increased transparency and enhanced both reputational and relationship outcomes of its stakeholders. This then expands the blockchain literature, because as I mentioned, not a lot of studies were looking at the what or the why question to blockchain. So that's what this study does. It talks about the new opportunities for relationship and reputation building that this technology can offer. This also reinforces the strategic function of the public relations in an organization. Interestingly, Walmart didn't really advertise or market this initiative, and yet the results were still favorable. So this hints at untapped potential that could be harnessed by involving public relations in the adoption of blockchain technology, which finally is a call to public relations practitioners. PR practitioners can benefit from understanding blockchain, how it works, its potential use cases and applications, and be involved in the discussions around a company deciding to adopt blockchain or not. So there's some limitations to the study that worth mentioning. This was a small survey sample size, as I mentioned. I still want my money back from Twitter on that one. In the survey, there was there could be a potential response bias in that, given that a lot of the respondents were my family and my friends and my colleagues, they know that I'm in the MCM, they know my study, they may have answered in a way that they feel I wanted them to. So there's that potential there. And this whole research was a single case study, so it's not generalizable to other industries or other organizations. Though that kind of ties into future research. So I think it would be really interesting to look at this in a different organization or an industry or different use of blockchain like digital identity or in healthcare and measure if the results are consistent. It would also be cool to look at a more diverse set of stakeholders. So one of the gaps in the study that I felt was that a lot of the survey respondents were customers of Walmart, not so much the suppliers of Walmart. It'd be really interesting to get the take of the suppliers and how they felt about this, because they may have a different opinion. And then finally, it'd be interesting to talk to public relations practitioners about blockchain. How are they feeling about it? And just kind of get their views and opinions on it. So I want to end by probably the most important slide, which is extending my heartfelt thanks to my wife, Emily, to my family, my friends, colleagues, my supervisor, Josie, for their unwavering support through my MCM journey. Like nodes in a blockchain network, these people formed an immutable bond that fueled my success, and for that, I am eternally grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. What a fascinating study. Very, very, very fascinating. So, Professor Josie, you're up.
All right. Well, Greg, first I'd like to say Thank you for an elegant, necessary, extremely interesting study and on building information for PR professionals, communication professionals, to understand the importance of blockchain. You really described it well at the beginning. I was very impressed with how you brought trust and blockchain together and the importance of those. And so one of my first questions is, blockchain technology has created excitement, innovation, and at times controversy with businesses, governments, hobbyists, entrepreneurs. This is a quote actually from your study. At the same time, the growing mistrust from the field is also growing. It is this oxymoron almost that your research is focused on. And why did you choose Walmart Traceability Initiative to highlight that trust that can be built? And were there some other examples you thought about investigating?
Yeah, thanks, Josie. So pretty early on in my literature review, I found a study that I mentioned a few times, and this was an Italian study, some researchers from Italy who looked at adopting the 5 companies that adopted Bitcoin, and then they measured reputational outcomes for them. And when I read through their limitations of their study, they said, well, these are smaller companies, and so the results might not be generalizable to a larger company. And I thought, interesting. So that actually kind of set me down the path of looking at what are big companies thinking about this technology? Are they thinking about it? And what's the potential there? Because 5 small companies adopting blockchain is one thing, but a big name like Walmart, that's something else. So there's a lot of customers. Walmart has huge economic power and influence. And so when I discovered that Walmart had adopted blockchain in this way, and it was also a different way, right? It wasn't using cryptocurrency, it was in supply chain. I think it was exciting in that it was a large company that could demonstrate the impact of blockchain, but also draw attention to the other ways that blockchain can be used outside of cryptocurrency, where that's where I think a lot of the mistrust lies. I don't want to get into, the debate on cryptocurrency. This allowed me to sort of sidestep that completely and say, look, there's another way that blockchain can be used, and it can be used in a way to enhance trust. And here's this massive, very influential company that's using it.
Thank you, Greg. Yes, and I agree, sort of pulling it outside of cryptocurrency and showing how blockchain actually has tremendous benefits and how that trust can be enhanced, that it's in fact should not be not trusted. It is what's going to allow us maybe to grow our trust with technologies, other technologies as well. My second question is regarding the content analysis of Twitter data and some of the challenges you face and limitations during the analysis process, and maybe how you address those.
Yeah, a big shout out to Josie, you and others in the MCM community, Alex, who helped out a lot with this, because there was a lot of learning of Python that went into that content analysis. It was a large data set. And I probably ended up doing quite a bit of sifting through tweets that had I known how to code better, I might not have had to end up doing. But one of the things that sticks out to me was that classifying a tweet as either blockchain related or not. And I'm just going to pull up that slide to help talk through it. So I'm referring to this middle part here, classifying each tweet as blockchain related or not. Believe it or not, that took a very long time because there were some tweets that might have mentioned words that would mean that it was related to Walmart's food traceability initiative. So to give an example of that, Walmart was doing this for lettuce, right? And so some tweets may have mentioned the word lettuce, and that's not related to blockchain. It's not even related to technology, but it was, as part of this study, it should have been classified as blockchain related. So I had to devise basically an algorithm or a function that allowed me to pull out all the different keywords that I thought would make a tweet related to Walmart's use of blockchain in this situation, and then find a way to score them so that I could classify each tweet as blockchain related or not, and then do that at scale across the entire data set, which, as I mentioned, was 60,000. So there was a lot of test, retest, rewrite the code, test, retest, until I could finally get what I felt was a good representation of whether a tweet was related to Walmart's use of blockchain or not. There was some similar stuff with the Vader sentiment as well, where they had to kind of do some human testing of that tool. But yeah, those are some of the big challenges that I faced with the content analysis.
Thank you for sharing that, so others can learn too from your methodology, because it was quite extensive, and I was very impressed with how you kept pushing and going forward and looking for the ways. And yes, Alex was a big help with that, so thank you as well, Alex, when you came in and gave a little bit of advice that way. Those are my two questions. I'm going to hand it over to the Alex now, our second reader. Alex.
Thank you. So first of all, Greg, congratulations on doing what I think is an excellent piece of work. I echo what Terry said, it's fascinating. And I hope that more people in our program for future students are inspired to follow in your footsteps and bring a little bit more quantitative data into their work. So my first question is methodological. Do you think that the fact that the interviews and the survey didn't work out as well as you thought was a serious hindrance, or do you how much of a limitation do you think that was in the bigger picture, given that I think your content analysis was very thorough and excellent? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to always be comparing back to that other study that I mentioned from Italy, but I mean, that study was solely focused on the content analysis, right? So a big piece of this research, I think, is reinforcing the findings that they found. I mean, what I found was consistent with what they found. And I think that in and of itself is a good contribution to the body of knowledge. So I don't feel too upset about the fact that the surveys was, under 100. I really wanted to hit that 100. But I think I still was able to tell a story about the data that I collected. And then, yeah, Alex, you mentioned something that I didn't really touch on in the presentation, which was interviews. So I did endeavor to try to conduct interviews with Walmart executives. And I wanted to talk to them about the actual implementation of this and whether they were thinking about it from a public relations perspective or not. And I was able to secure one interview with an individual there. And I think that helped me sort of contextualize the study and understand a little bit of how Walmart was approaching this. It gave me some of that context to know that Walmart really wasn't pitching it widely. They weren't advertising this. It was something that they really truly adopted to enhance their transparency and their ability to trace something back to its origin. And so that kind of tells an interesting story too, in that they did this to try to enhance trust, but they didn't try to make a big sort of story about it. And still there was those positive outcomes. So a slightly long-winded way of saying, I suppose, that I'm still happy with the results of this study, because as you mentioned, I think the content analysis was thorough and it reinforced previous findings in other research.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I think you can pull the content, like if you're going to submit this to a journal, which I strongly suggest that you do, and I would actually pull the content analysis out as a standalone for the journal article, right? But the whole thing was just really well done. Second methodological question, and then I guess I have another third question, but for the third round, I guess, if we get there. I know Josie has pretty good.
Second round.
What's that? Sorry, second round.
Second round. We're still in the first round.
I have a third question for the second round. But my second question here is around Vader. So how maybe demystify the use of this kind of tools for some of the people who may be listening or who may listen to this this recording in the future when they're thinking about doing their capstone. So two-part question. Number one, methodologically, what did you do? How did it work? Right, the training and all that that's involved in setting Vader up. And two, how painful was it? Like, could you, like, can someone do this, right? Who and how many hours would it take? So two-part question.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So so I pulled up again the slide here just to help chat through it. So what Vader does is it takes a string of text. So a tweet that might say, hey, did you see that Walmart's adopting blockchain? How cool! Exclamation point. And it tokenizes that, which basically just splits it up into the individual words. And then Vader looks at each word, and based on a library that it has stored, a dictionary essentially, it can tell if that word is either a positive word or a negative word. So that if that tweet has enough positive words, then it gets classified as positive because it starts to attribute a higher score to each of those words, and then it kind of averages the score for the entire tweet. So one of the challenges was around this threshold. So this negative 0.5 and the 0.5. Vader has a standard threshold. Alex, you can probably correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's 0.05 on either side of what they consider positive and negative. Is it high? Oh, it is. Okay, yeah. I found, so basically what I did is I just said, okay, I'll take that standard and I'll apply it to my data set. And then I pulled a stratified sample from that 60,000 tweets, and I looked and I tested myself. So I took 100 tweets out and I looked at how Vader had scored it, but I did that blindly. So I looked at the tweet and I said, okay, this is a positive tweet. This is a negative tweet. And then afterwards, I compared it to the results from Vader and I tested how accurate the tool was. When I initially was testing it, I was getting accuracy rates in maybe 60 to 70% accurate for positive and negative. And so what I started to do is just tweak that threshold. So if the positive accuracy rate wasn't quite there, and most of my classifications were positive, whereas Vader would give it negative, then I would increase that threshold and then run the tool again, pull 100 tweets out again, and look at them and test it again. I ended up doing that, I think, about 5 or 6 times to get to an accuracy rate that I felt comfortable with, which was around nearly 90%. It was getting close to 90% accurate. That process, I mean, your second question, Alex, is that possible? Is it feasible? Yes, if you're willing to spend some time and learn and just be, I think, patient, honestly. I think once you sort of get the process down and you understand what needs to be done, it's definitely possible. But I think if I were to do this again, I'd have a much easier time and I could probably do it a lot quicker because I've gone through it the first time. So there's a bit of a learning curve, but that's with everything, right?
So what you're saying is I need to put a specific Vader exercise on the data science course so everybody gets some practice with it.
There you go.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Greg, I'm going to ask a more general question about blockchain and this profession. Obviously, it's a very complex subject. It takes a lot of time and aptitude to both statistically understand, how you would measure this, but also the technology behind blockchain as well. So how do you envision the blockchain technology influencing the future of transparency and authenticity in public relations, particularly in the context of both crisis management and establishing public trust?
An awesome question. And I think about, so I mentioned Don and Alex Tapscott. They had a book that came out, I want to say 2006. It was before, let's say, the introduction of blockchain, which was essentially in 2008 when Bitcoin kind of hit the world. And they had a book called The Naked Corporation, and talking about how there is this heightening of transparency, right? So with digital technology, stakeholders are expecting for corporations to be more transparent. And also, I mean, think about some of the news lately, right, where it doesn't take much for somebody at a company, an employee, to take a screenshot of an email they received from the CEO and put that on Twitter, and all of a sudden you've got yourself, an issue or a challenge to deal with. So where I think blockchain fits into that is that it can be a tool. So I don't, there's no sort of push. Companies don't have to adopt blockchain. There's no regulation pushing them to. It's not like everybody's rushing to get there. But I think that it's, as I say, it's a tool. It's something that companies can use to enhance their transparency, to enhance trust that customers can have in them. And therefore, it's a strategic asset, or it can be, right? So if we have this crisis of trust that's happening, here's one way that organizations can be more transparent and therefore obtain more trust from stakeholders. So I think in terms of public relations, that's a conversation that we should be involved in. It's something that we can be bringing to the table if it's not already being discussed. And if an organization is hoping to adopt it, we can be there to inform and advise on what the potential outcomes would be, and maybe what some of the challenges and pitfalls are to try to avoid. Because it's not all roses and daisies with blockchain, right? There's, as we've all been talking about, there's contentious and controversy around it too. So who better than public relations practitioners to be involved in those conversations?
Thank you. Okay, so we have 8 minutes left. Josie, one question, then Alex, one question.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to just how you, Greg, you integrated the survey and the content analysis together, and those, they enhanced each other. They really, I believe, gave you the same messaging. And so I just wanted for you to share how that happened when you brought the findings from the survey and the content analysis to provide a comprehensive understanding of the impact.
Yeah, I guess the simplest way of thinking about that is I was kind of, I don't know if pleased is the right word, but I guess validated to see that both methodologies showed the same pattern, right, which was enhanced outcomes. So the content analysis showed that tweets about Walmart had more positive sentiment than non-blockchain related tweets. And then the survey showed similarly that relationship outcomes were better when people understood that Walmart was using blockchain technology adoption. And so, yeah, it was nice to see that common thread between the two methodologies, showing the same sort of story, that this technology does have potential to enhance public relations outcomes. It's interesting to think about, though, if that wasn't the case, if say the survey didn't show the results that it did, or the content analysis did it, and there was that contradictory evidence between the two, that's interesting. And to be honest, I guess I'm a little bit happy that I didn't have to think about that and try to make sense of that. So I think it's validating to see that common thread between them, and it's this idea of triangulating the data, right? So there's multiple outcomes showing the same result.
Yeah, and I thank you for that's my final question, and for sharing how the data was consistent. And I feel there's a lot of opportunity in demonstrating that trust can be built, and that, yes, communicators can help enhance that knowledge for people, that they'll see this as technology that will in fact help build reputations, help build trust, and maybe help with crisis communications, as Terry has mentioned. That was my final question. Thank you so much. It was a pure pleasure to work together on this initiative and learn more, bringing it all together. Greg, thank you very much.
Thank you, Josie.
Okay, Alex.
Okay, quick question, final question. So, and just quick answer so we can have the question from the gallery if there's any. So how do we operationalize this, right? So how does PR actually get involved? Yeah.
I think step one is understanding it. I mean, I would love to, as I say, talk to public relations practitioners about their level of understanding of blockchain. But then I think after that, it's twofold. It's if an organization is using blockchain, then it's getting involved in that conversation and bringing to that conversation the why, the what, why are we doing this? And are we doing this for the right reason? And then the other is, if there is an issue or if there's a trust issue with an organization, then it's being able and being prepared to suggest a solution that could involve something like this. I don't even think, as I mentioned, this is something that's on public relations practitioners' minds. So if we can understand it and then apply it, or at least suggest it, we're not going to be the ones who are actually, doing the implementation of the technology itself, but even being able to start that conversation from that sort of bigger organizational strategic values level. That's how I think we sort of action this. And also I'd say from a research perspective, validate the findings, keep looking into it, right? What are the other applications and uses of it, and are they consistent with these findings?
Thank you.
My last comment would be that, Greg, I would encourage you very quickly to clean this up and get this in shape for submission to a journal article. This is obviously a timely, very interesting case study, huge relevance to the profession. So working with both Alex and Josie to get this out. Don't let it sit on the burner for the rest of the summer, because things could change dramatically. So get it submitted. PR Journal or PR Review might be a really good place to start. So okay, we have 3 minutes left. Entertain one question from the gallery, if anybody has one. People are so afraid. What's the matter? I think. Sabrina, do you have any questions? You did your capstone on technology and then Comtech in this field.
Mine is more of a comment, and it's in relation to what you were saying, Terry, how we operationalize it. Greg, I think similar to what I experienced, it's really a change management function, getting practitioners to understand how these technologies work and bringing it to the forefront in how we can use it for our own use. So in my capstone, I focused on the use of different platforms for reputation management. So very similar in that it's going to take, I think, a lot of effort from those like us who are curious, those who are interested, to raise how we can use it, because it is incredibly valuable, especially for reputation management. So very happy to see that you have a practical case study to put forward. And I echo what Terry is saying, like definitely publish it. I think more people need to start seeing the utility of it. So well done.
Thank you, Sabrina. I appreciate that. And let's join forces on that good effort of change management, because I think, there's a ton of potential here. And that's great. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I have another potential case study, and it's my favorite gin distiller in Ireland who uses blockchain actually to showcase where all of their products come from, including the seeds and processing as well. So I heard about this in 2016 on my first visit with them. So there's lots of case studies, I think, and it's all about reputation for them, right? To really distinguish them from other people who might not be, true distillers, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to put everybody except for Josie and Alex and I in a breakout room. This is where we deliberate on the final results. If you see white smoke outside your window, it probably has nothing to do with our deliberations, and probably more to the wildfires. So there won't be any white smoke here. Okay, here we go.